is Bear Siragusa, and you are listening to the Hunting Hound podcast presented by W Hunting Supply. All right, I'm sitting here with Becky Dwire. How are you doing, Becky?
I am just chugging along. How about you?
About the same. Yeah, got done with a long day of work. Actually, it's been a long couple of days. Yesterday afternoon, I was going to make pizza for my son and I, and made the dough, got it all ready, and then he asked me a question, and I came back in stupidly and answered his question, and went back out to find that Mike the Beagle had eaten the entire pizza dough, which was a yeast dough, so he immediately started to bloat. So I've spent the last, my wife has unfortunately been inflicted. I inflicted this all on her too. Dealing with a vomiting beagle for the last 24 hours. He seems pretty okay now, but yeah.
Funny you mentioned that. About a week ago, we left the shed door open, and somehow they got into dog food, and the one beagle just is horrendously gluttonous. I mean, will be to where he can't do anything but stand there, can't sit, can't lay down, can't anything. And I caught him in the act of it, so I'm like, all right, well, you're going to throw up for the next 2 hours. And sure enough, because it was like, I mean, put a pin in him and he would have flown around like a balloon. He was that dang bloated. So yeah, and then I'm like, gosh, I don't know what's worse, laying around bloated or just puking your guts out for the next X amount of time. But
I don't know either. Yeah. The scary thing with the pizza dough it was raw dough. It wasn't like a, prepared crust. So
right.
And with the yeast, because it's like a yeast dough, the danger is that it's just going to keep sort of yeasting in there, especially with the how much of it he ate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he was. I felt a little bad for him. He was projectile vomiting for quite a long time. So,
and I guarantee he regretted
absolutely none of it. I mean, none of it. Instantly, the second he was done vomiting, he was trying to steal food from the counter again. So he's learned nothing from it, which is fine. Which is fine. But on that,
beagles, they're just a trip.
They are, especially beagle puppies. And on that note, you wanted to talk about puppies today.
I do. I always want to talk about puppies. They are.
So what about puppies, Becky?
Just kind of going over, you see a lot of different methodologies and ideas on dog training in general, not just hounds. I mean, everything. And you see a lot of what to do's. You don't see a lot of how to do's, if that makes sense. And I've tried a lot of different ways. I've worked for some folks who have had different ways, and I don't know, I'm kind of all about easy and effective.
Sure.
There's a lot of different methods out there, and as you know, about the only thing dog people can agree on is that the other guy's wrong. So there's a lot of different methods out there, and this just seems to be what has worked the best for me in my situation. Sure. And you can kind of do as much or as little as you want. You see in the hound world, generally speaking, you see a lesser emphasis on obedience as far as the amount of commands and the responsiveness to it. You're not going to see the same type of obedience you would see in, say, a border collie or a field trial lab or a Schutzhund dog or something of that nature. It just kind of is
that's
the nature of the beast.
And that's a legit observation that, I think a lot of people look at it as, well, they don't need that. They're hounds. They're,
Mm-hmm.
they don't need to learn how to sit and stay and wait and, all of these different things. But I mean, that seems like a solid observation to me. Yeah.
And with that being said, I don't put a lot of obedience on ours. I mean, I could. It's just something that, with the amount, sometimes I've got to, in order to make sure everybody's getting attention, getting their needs met. It's just one of those things that at times can go by the wayside. But I have done what I need for me.
What is
but
that?
I do like to teach them, sit, lay down. Generally, sit, lay down, come when you're called the first time, because I will not call you repeatedly. There's few things I hate more than nagging a dog. Stand or sitting to be collared, sitting for your food, letting me touch you all over, general manners, don't drag me all over the place, having their feet handled, just all kinds of things. I want them to go, and our dogs are probably less exposed to people than, say, your average person who's living in a neighborhood. Their buddies are coming over, like we live very rurally. Basically, they just see us, clients, vets on occasion, a little more often than I would like lately, but I want them to be mannered. That being said, for me personally, man shyness does not bother me. I kind of prefer that they're not overly friendly to strangers to where they can be picked up off the mountain or something. I have some that think they're running for mayor and they have never met a stranger in their life. And I have some that act around strangers like they could star in a ASPCA Sarah McLachlan commercial. But I have them just to where they're handleable. I want them to be able to go into the vet's office and stand there, not need muzzled, not be freaking out. Just general manners.
I mean, I think that makes sense. There's a lot to be said for that. The dog mushing community went through a real change of heart when it came to stuff like that about 30 years ago, where, it used to be this attitude that don't pet them, it'll make them soft, don't bring them inside, it'll make them soft. If they were aggressive towards other dogs and aggressive towards people, that just, meant that they were hard, and what it got to the point where, all of these different races, especially, they started getting quite a bit of pressure from animal rights groups to have better veterinary care. And the veterinarians were coming in and the races accommodated that. The veterinarians started coming in, and it just ended up being this thing where the veterinarians were like, what? I'm getting tired of being bitten. So there became not only an emphasis on teaching, or handling the animals more, but also an emphasis on breeding away from the uber shy, aggressive animals. But so much of that, and what we found later, which, I mean, I think a lot of other dog sports, like you pointed out, already knew it. What the mushers found out is that a lot of that has to do with how they're handled as pups, the socialization, and how much time you actually put into your puppy litters.
Yeah, and it's always a little bit of an odd thought to me that having dogs that mind, dogs that live in the house, that is somehow going to undo the genetic and instinct of hundreds of years of selective breeding. Like if your dog has that little drive and instinct to do their job, that being overly comfortable or friendly is going to disintegrate that. I feel like there's probably some things that need to be looked at.
There may be some other issues that need to be addressed. Yeah. I can agree with that.
I would say.
I mean, Yeah.
And then how much is the genetic component too? I mean, I have a couple of dogs. Majority of ours, I mean, anyone could walk in the dog yard. They're going to fire off when someone shows up for sure. 9/10 of them are going to be really friendly, neutral to really friendly.
Right.
I do have one that was a bottle puppy, did not see well. His first experience with strangers was having the vet come work on his eyes 3 times. Now, if he's not confined, he'll be your best buddy. If he is confined and a stranger comes in, leave him alone. He's going to try and get away from you, but if he can't, he's going to nail you. And some of that is a little bit of some weirdness that came out in some line breeding that we no longer use those genetics. And then I have another one that I raised from day one. He is extremely man shy to the point where it took Cleve, I mean, no joke, 2 years to be able to catch him without having to reel him in. Super nice to him. He's just very much so a soft one-person dog, very much so a woman's dog. He's great now. Anyone can, Cleve or I can handle him. When my niece was living with us, she can handle him fine. But he's a dog that a stranger is not going to be able to interact with. And he's just going to go off in the brush and be fine. But it works out. I don't have to worry about him being picked up, and I just kind of know how to handle him, and it works out fine. Is it something I would strive for? Absolutely not. Is it something that I'm willing to deal with?
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
So, but yeah, I think definitely the way.
I totally see that. Yeah. It's, but when you talk about setting up basic obedience stuff and handling them and how do you go about that? Do you start when they're, I would assume that a lot of the handling, touching their feet and ears and mouths and things like that starts when they're, newborn. How do you sort of go through the process? I have my own ways of doing things, but I'd like to hear, how do you go about that?
I'm a pest with puppies. I love being around them. I love holding them, doing all that stuff. So, when they're born, check them over, make sure everything's good. Leave them alone for, usually the night, because that's generally when it happens.
Of course.
Just make sure everybody's nursing. The first day, monitor. Day 2 comes along. Time to go to school. So we utilize the early neurological stimulation program. Some people call it the Super Dog program. So we do that days 2 through 16. And that is basically, for those unfamiliar with the program, it's different ways of handling the puppy that subject them to tactile stimulation and changes in body position that unconsciously stresses the puppy's system, therefore boosting their stress response, their adrenals, their stress tolerance. So that's what I do day 2 through 16, besides just regular
What
handling.
does that look like? Like, can you give me an example of one of those or some of that?
Yeah. So you take, it are 3 to 5 seconds are how long you do the movements for. And what I'll do is take a Q-tip and tickle the webbing in between their toes and their pad. Sure. You place them on a cold washcloth for 3 to 5 seconds for some thermoregulation and stress. You hold them in different positions. So you'll have one move where you'll hold them cupped in your hands on their back, straight up with their head above their tail, almost like they were sitting down, upside down. There's a whole printout of different moves that you do, and it takes a very short amount of time. The military came up with it. They no longer use it. But for me, I mean, for a litter of 8 to 10 puppies, it takes a very short amount of time. And the puppies that I have used it on, I think I see a difference. Maybe it's a placebo effect, but they're just, not much bothers them. They're super tough, super tolerant to discomfort. They don't get stressed as bad. So it's definitely something that we see enough of a benefit to spend 10 minutes a day doing it.
I mean, you know, the way I look at it is, what have you got to lose? You know, if it works, then fantastic. If it doesn't work, you still got your hands on those pups, socializing them, getting them used to your smell. I mean, there's no downside to doing it as far as I can see.
Absolutely. And it also gives you a chance to check those puppies out. Like if I've got a puppy that I am moving around and he's not squealing or he's not giving me a lot of physical motion and trying to adjust, I'm thinking something's not quite right here. What's going on with this puppy? Is he starting to fade? Something's not quite right. So it just kind of forces you to interact and just really kind of go over the little checklist and make sure they're doing all right.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. It's yeah, I mean, it's remarkably similar to what I did with my husky puppies and what I've done with all of my hounds once I've gotten them. It's been a little bit different because they've come to me at 8 weeks. Mike was a little different because I was there right after they were born, and then I was there every few days until he turned 8 weeks. So those pups knew me really well. Luckily the breeder was a guy who he enjoyed the company, so I could swing in after work and handle the pups quite a bit. And you know, a lot of what motivated me to pick Mike was his response to the different things. You know, me playing with his feet and, you know, looking at his ears and checking in his mouth and, you know, breathing into his face and, you know, things like that just kind of, you know, gave him a vague sense of who I was, but at the same time also gave me a vague sense of what he was made out of. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. When you said it was from, what was the time frame that you were talking about that you just said it was it to 16 weeks?
It's day 2 to day 16.
It was day 16. Okay. Yeah. What happens after day 16?
Yeah, so generally speaking, and sometimes I'll actually wait a little bit because we generally dock tails at day 2. So sometimes I'll wait until day 3 just so I'm not completely stressing them out, which, I mean, the tails really, it stresses mom out more than the pups, but just in general, I kind of like to make sure they've got a good grasp on life and they're nice and strong before I start doing any type of stressful stuff. And like I said, it's all very short. They're not freaking out. It's subconscious stress that basically triggers their system to amp up, if that makes any kind of sense. So after that, usually I will start, by the time they're a couple of weeks old, their nails are starting to get sharp. And if you watch when they're nursing, they start kneading and they'll actually scratch that bitch's bag up. So I'll take them and just grab a little pair of nail trimmers. I'll set them in my lap, and their eyes may or may not be open by this point. It just depends, obviously, how quick they're growing. And I'll just nip the hooks off. So they're used to getting their feet handled. I'll check their ears, check their eyes, or if their eyes are sealed, just make sure everything's good there. You know, I've had some pups where the eye will just be a tiny little bit open and it's enough for some bacteria or something to get in there and cause an infection. So I just more of checking everything out.
It's proactive.
So, and then and then from that point, you know, for the next week, there's not really a ton you can do with them that they're going to cognitively realize. Once their eyes are open, they're walking around, they're starting to play, then you can really kind of jump into getting stuff done. But what you said earlier, I also do kind of breathing on them. I'll usually put them in my tank top or something and kind of carry them around, just getting them used to me, my smell, and I found it seems to bond them a little bit more, I think. Then when you don't do that, I don't know if they, like Cleve has brought it up. He's like, it's almost like they take it as some type of maternal bond with you more so than me. Because I mean, he's not really packing them around in his shirt. He goes in and messes with them and holds them and stuff. But I don't know if they associate just kind of that warmth and everything when their eyes are still closed to being similar to the same feelings they get from their mother. I have experimented a little bit on and off with some early scent stuff. Not actually where you're laying out treats and having them trail, scent or anything like that for their dinner, but just kind of introducing them to scent here and there on a rag, or sometimes I might wipe a little bit of scent along the bitch's bag or her stomach line, and just seeing, just kind of messing around and seeing. I haven't done enough of it to have mine made up yet. But so then you're kind of, like I said, you're kind of waiting for them to get to where they're actually cognizant and learning things, not just doing stuff, but actually able to learn stuff. Then I start really interacting with them more in a learning situation where at 8 weeks, I don't want them jumping on the kennel door. And that's, some of that I work together as a group, some of it I work together separately. But I won't open the kennel door until they've got their feet on the ground.
Right.
I don't like that. Because just my luck, then I go to do something and they whack the door open, hits me in the face. I'm pissed off, and they just don't need to be doing that. So I'll wait. And I think what I like to do the most is let them learn on their own. I think they retain it better that way, and let them problem solve. Like, okay, well, this isn't, jumping on the door isn't working. So I'm bored now. I'm going to go check out what's over on this side of the kennel. Oh, wow. As soon as I got off the door, it opened up. They're a lot smarter than people give them credit for. I like to
go
use...
ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
They are. I think that people don't, complex problem solving, that takes a while to develop, I think. But the ability to put two and two together, cause and effect, action consequences, they're pretty sharp when it comes to stuff like that. It's like what's that old saying? Bitten twice, always wary, something like that. They're able to figure it out, unless it's food related in beagles. But otherwise it's surprised me with all the pups I've had through the years how quickly they learn, to stay away from the cat after they get clawed, or stay away from a car after they've been clipped or something like that. It usually doesn't take a lot, thankfully, for them to learn.
Especially at that young age, they're so impressionable, and their little sponges, and their first experiences with everything is going to shape. It's a lot easier to have a good first experience than it is to try and undo a bad first experience.
Man.
Now, that being said, I don't want to say simulate a bad experience, but like I've had a lot of people ask, well, what about your mules and your horse and the puppies? Because I pretty much kick everybody out. Like, I don't have a specific dog yard. They're loose and doing whatever they want. Generally speaking, I think a lot of it has to do with just the size and the vibration on the ground. And when the mules come running in, they're rowdy and kicking and bucking. And so the puppies are kind of like, "Ooh, that's a little intimidating." If they're not, and they continue to want to go in the pen because they figure out that mule crap's really great to eat, and then eat so much you throw up later, beagle things. I'll grab that puppy and walk over to one of those mules and kind of let that mule come over to smell them. And when you've got the head of 1,000-pound animal coming at you and you weigh 10 pounds, it freaks them out a little bit, and it seems to give them a healthy respect. They'll still go in the pen, but they will stay, 10 or 15 feet away.
Yep. No, that makes...
And for the most part, my mules are pretty patient. I've had pups run right underneath one of them, and he's like, all right, whatever. One of them, they smell her tail, and she's good. I've got some young ones right now that are a little bit more interested in the pups than I would like them to be.
Okay.
They'll kind of put their head down, and they're not necessarily chasing them out of there, but it's close enough that I run them off when they do it, and one may end up needing. Actually, I use an e-collar on them at times for things like that on the mules. Actually, I have to strap like two of them together.
That works.
Just to fit around their neck, but it works. But then puppies, when they get those first experiences, it really helps to form kind of their opinion for the rest of their life on things. And I think it's a whole lot easier to teach puppies at that age than it is an older dog.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, in fact, Pat Nolan, and I may be quoting this wrong, it's been a while since I read it, but Pat Nolan, who has been a retriever trainer and many other type of dogs for over 30 years, he was putting on a puppy raising seminar that my dad actually attended, and we were talking about it, and he said, they talk about how when those puppies are about 6 months, the neural pathways start shutting down that they haven't been using. So if okay, I don't need to be thinking about XYZ. So that part almost like goes dormant, and they use those for other things. So if you don't use up that learning ability, you kind of lose it.
That's 100% true. 100% true. Yeah. I had a Labrador once who he had been kept in a crate apart from 2 20-minute walks a day, had been kept in a crate like the rest of the time, until he was about a year and a half. And that's when I got him. And, I put a lot of time into my dogs. And I mean, this dog, dang, he never, and in the end, I just chalked it up to that dog never learned how to learn. And he couldn't. It was the most ridiculous thing to watch. You could say, we used 2 years to teach the dog his name. And then you could say, Charlie, sit. And you could see like the cogs go starting, you could see smoke. Like you could see him really trying to remember what sit meant. And I mean, it was something we did every day, multiple times a day. And, he'd sit, and then he'd lay down, and then he'd stand up. And it was just like the dog was the least trainable dog I've ever come across. And I do believe that it was just because when he was at that sort of formative age where those neural pathways get not just, not necessarily made, but at least set in stone, it just didn't happen. So yeah, until the day he died when he was 12. It was like hit or miss whether he sat on his first try.
It's sad, really. I mean, that's no life for anything. And, another example of that is we had a pup that we let someone have as a whatever. The dog sat his entire life until we got him back, which was, I think he was 3. And we had told this person, I always tell people, if for whatever reason, this dog comes back to me, like whatever reason doesn't work out, this dog comes back to me. They didn't have any other dogs. This was their only dog, So he never got to interact with other dogs besides, when he was a little bitty guy and we had him. And to bring him back into a pack environment was extremely stressful because there were constantly problems because he didn't know how to communicate with other dogs. Like he didn't read social cues, which most people think, oh, well, a dog's a dog. They know. They don't. If they don't get that interaction, they don't understand. They don't know warning cues. They don't know appeasement. They don't know any of that. And that just goes to show, like, if the brain isn't being used, it's a muscle. If it doesn't exercise, it doesn't grow. And the term that you used, learning to learn, is one I also use. And it's so helpful in establishing a relationship with a puppy and being like, hey, you can think through this. It doubles as teaching them to be independent and problem solve, but also to look to you, if that makes sense. I mean, obviously, if they're 5 miles up on the mountain, they can't look to me, but they can sit here and go, okay, let me figure this out, instead of just bulldozing their way through life.
I mean, doing the kind of stuff that we do with our hounds, that kind of dog generally doesn't live that long. It's the unfortunate reality of it. You know, Charlie was a house dog. He could be a complete idiot all of his life. And, you know, we protected him more or less. You know, we were his buffer from the real world, you know, but like Dan the Plot, you know, I have you know, he had some experiences when he was a pup that just kind of formed how he was as an adult, or how he is as an adult. And in ways that kind of caught me a little bit by surprise. But, you know, that's a dog that I think he could do with a little bit more common sense than he's got. Because I'm not sure, you know, he's 2 now. I'm not sure he's going to make it to like 12. I'd be surprised.
Gotcha.
He just doesn't seem to have that self-preservation, common sense streak doesn't seem to be fully developed there for some reason. I mean, it could be that he's a Plot. I'm not sure, but no comment.
No comment. And, you know, I feel like, too, there's some dogs that are just going to accept you and do what you want, and it's fine. You don't really have to put much work into them. And then you get a beagle, and they go, why? Right. I don't have to do that. Who made you? Like, you think you run this place? And that's what really kind of kick-started me. I mean, you know, I've said in the past, I grew up with field trial retrievers. So, I mean, obedience was, you know, if you blow a sit whistle at 350 yards, you better be burning grass with your rear end, turning to sit and face me. And I think when I got in the hounds, I kind of let that go by the wayside a little bit. I was a little burned out on the obedience stuff. And then, you know, you get into the beagles. And even right now, the other day, my Huey dog's collar was dying. So I went out. I could hear him trailing out in the sagebrush, and I just walked out to him. And he heard me coming. I could see him looking at me out of the corner of his eye, and I called him, and he'd come to me, and I'd go to step towards him, and he'd step and go just a step ahead of me to where I'm not going to let her catch me. And I kind of used the "don't make me come up there" tone of voice, and he came over all pouty and took off again. But it's like they give you a little bit of a run for your money when it comes to dogs that are maybe a little more intelligent. And that's kind of pushed me back into the obedience some. So when they're little guys, you know, I will use the luring and shaping method where I'll use a lot of food, a lot of mental engagement to get them doing what I want. And I'll get into that as well. But when you start breaking down kind of the different training methodologies, I worked for a guy who wanted his dogs a little bit jumpy around him because it makes them pay attention. Didn't want their tails up, didn't want them wagging, just wanted them, I wouldn't say fearful, but just a little unsure. It worked for him. I mean, the guy is Hall of Fame trainer. It worked for him, and I'm not saying my way is going to work for everybody. That's just personally not what I like to see. I want a dog that's engaged and wants to work with me. I would rather motivate than intimidate. And I mean, there's time, you know, you can't be completely black and white. There's times where each side needs to come into things, but I would rather lure the dog and encourage them to do the right thing and then proof them later on when I know they know what I'm talking about and they make a decision to not do that. Then there's time for correction. But when they're little guys, you know, say 4 months and under, super food motivated, and it helps keep them engaged because 8-week-old puppies have the attention span of a goldfish. And no matter how exciting I make myself and how exciting I make learning, food really helps with that. So hot dogs for the win because they're cheap and they smell good to puppies. And I can cut them up, you know, whatever. So we can get into that if you want and kind of how I start that. And
yeah, I would love to. You know, I think that, you know, one thing that you just touched on there that I want to talk a little bit more about before we move on is, that no matter how interesting you make yourself, that you're going to lose their attention span. Their attention span is so short that eventually without food or without food, or if you wait too long, or use too much time on it, where you sort of burn out their ability to learn from you a little bit, I think. I knew a guy who he would come down on dogs so hard from they were tiny little puppies for things that they did wrong. In his mind, it made it, it was consistency was his deal. But what ended up happening, and I observed this over about 10 years, was that the dogs were so used to these enormous eruptions of, anger, frustration, whatever, that it got to the point where unless he was there at that sort of erupting anger mode, they just didn't listen to him. They're like, how angry is he right now? Okay, he's not that angry. He told me to do something, but he's not screaming yet.
Absolutely.
So we've got a few minutes, and I think there's something to be said for that. Like you said, not calling twice. You want to, I would much rather have a dog that, when I say, hey, come here, I'd much rather have them come then than have me, hit them with a barrage of come here, getting angrier and angrier as I yell.
Absolutely. I think, and that kind of goes back to, the shaping and luring teaches a dog what to do. And the proofing, which proofing is correction afterwards and basically testing the situation, teaches them what not to do. And you can absolutely make a dog hard-headed by doing exactly what you talked about. I've seen the same scenario when I was a kid in one of my dad's training groups. Very, very high-end, talented dogs that would probably have normally been soft if they were owned by an average to softer person. But same thing. Screaming head off, just blowing up, and that's what got the dog's attention because that was what was finally over threshold. For me, I want to enjoy my dogs. I want to enjoy their company. I don't want to be screaming, and my goal is to constantly be having to use less pressure.
Right.
I mean, if they have a bone or something, or they're running away from me, I want to just be able to say, for example, Rawhide, come, in that tone, and drops what he's doing and come to me. Life is too short, and when you have that many dogs, there's no enjoyment in that for me, and your dogs don't enjoy it. And they don't like being nagged any more than you do. They'll take advantage of it. Like you said, they'll go, I've got 15 more times in my name being called before I actually need to mind.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. They, it's, like we said, they're smarter than we give them credit for. And I sometimes wonder whether we're not as smart as we give ourselves credit for as dog trainers. But,
for sure. And you can't get stuck in the textbook what's supposed to be too. Like, you're learning that dog while you're teaching that dog, if that makes sense. Like, everything should be dictated by that dog. What you might consider a reward, if it's not a reward to that dog, it doesn't matter. What you might consider high pressure, if it's not high pressure to that dog, it doesn't matter. What you might consider low pressure, it's all based on the dog and the dog's feedback. And if you don't consider that, you're going to have you and that dog are going to have a pretty tough road ahead of you.
Totally agree. Totally agree. You've got to take the individual into account as you set up the training schedule. And I mean, not just training schedule, but how you approach that dog at all. It's one of those things where people kind of they love the they love that the dogs are individuals, but at the same time, they kind of want them to be a little bit more, a little bit. I get the impression that a lot of people would prefer that some of the variables were taken away, some of the individuality were taken away, that there was a little bit more of a like step, 10-step program to get a good trained dog that works for everybody. And that's just not how it works. I mean, it's never going to be how it works. And, that's what I think separates the good dog trainers, from the guys who have had that 1 or 2 dogs in their lifetimes that have been super dogs for them because those 2 just clicked. That dog was buying what the trainer was selling, wholeheartedly and completely. And, for some people, that one or two dogs in their lifetime is going to be enough. But I think the really, really good trainers out there, they end up with a lot of dogs like that because they themselves are flexible enough to, accommodate that dog's needs and that dog's, what makes that dog tick. They're interested in finding that out as much as they are in getting the dog to do what they want them to do.
I think another thing that a lot of people, maybe because of our nature, I don't want to say forget about, but maybe don't consider as much because we're humans and we talk and that's how we communicate. And dogs don't, obviously. So I think body language oftentimes can inhibit a dog's reaction. Like my dogs know when I'm not paying attention and I'm just kind of half whatever. And they know when I'm paying attention and requesting their attention back just by my body. And if you think about a lot of our body movements go directly against a dog's natural body language. Like when we're happy, we're loud and we smile. We show our teeth. Now, granted, my dog knows I'm not another dog, but that plays a big role in my puppy training too, where I'm just wanting to use the command when I'm luring them into that. But if, say, they're not putting their weight back over their hips for a sit, I'll lean into them. Or if I'm teaching them, I'm luring them into the down position and there's almost like a little bit of a physical block because I'm too close, I'll take a step back, wham, they drop right down. It's just like working a horse. I mean, it's kind of a dance, physically, and it definitely plays a big role.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I just finished writing an article for Colby Moorhead over at Bear Hunting Magazine about this specific thing, about puppies specifically and body language. I probably told the story before, but I know I've told the story before, so I'll actually spare everybody the repeat of the story. But, the body language aspect of training is so, Sorry, my brain's working in Norwegian still. So, undervurdert, which is not an American word, so I have no idea, you guys won't know what I'm talking about, but it's I don't think people realize how important the body language aspect of it is. And that was something that it took me a long, long time to learn myself. Because I had this thing where with my huskies and, to a degree with my hounds as well, I was still sort of developing this as I got into the hounds, phased the huskies out and got into the hounds. I've had this desire to always be up, to be the leader. And in my head, being the leader of this, the coach, I needed to be up. I needed to be the motivator, the cheerleader kind of, for when things got tough or when things weren't going well, especially when things weren't going well. And it just wasn't working. It just was this idea that I needed to always be like positive and motivated and like, we can do this. It just, the dogs could see right through me. I could say all of these great things. I could talk in the sweetest tone of voice. They could still see right through me. And in the end, I decided that, I was basically what it amounted to is that I was lying to them, and that was making them uncertain. They're like, well, he's saying one thing, but clearly he's thinking another thing. So we don't really know where we've got this guy. Like, what's the right call to make here? And, it got to the point where eventually I just had to stop. Like, I was actually in the process of selling the sled dogs. I just hit a complete wall, just did not want to do it anymore. And the last dogs that I sold were, that I was going to sell were my favorites, and sort of realized that they were my favorites for a reason. And when I started treating them like they deserved to be treated, and I don't mean that in a cruel sense, in the like, well, he messed up, so he deserved to be kicked. That's not what I mean. But in the sense that they deserved from me that I was honest with them when they were messing up, and that I was happy with them when they were doing well. Because it's as you pointed out, it's the proofing them portion that I was messing up on, because I taught them what I wanted. And then was giving them confusing feedback when they weren't doing what I wanted, but I was still treating them, still talking to them like they were, what good dogs you are. When realistically, they really weren't being very good dogs right then.
Inconsistency breeds insecurity. Yeah. And I think you also have to teach a dog, you have to allow a dog to fail and to learn they can get through it, for example. And that's one of the things where you can burn a young dog out on problem solving if they're having a hard time and they can't figure it out. Let's say you're going from teaching them sit to lay down or stay or something, and they can't figure it out, and they're constantly being either told they're wrong or corrected depending on the age of the dog. And they'll sit there and they'll quit you if you do not go back to something they know. They need to be successful and realize, oh, okay, yep, I screwed up, but I'm good. I got that. Let's go back. It's kind of, I don't know. I guess that's with people too. I mean, anything really. If you don't want to browbeat anything and be like, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. And you're not getting that right. It's okay. We didn't get that, but let's do this. And that gives them the confidence enough to go back. If I'm trying to get this dog to lay down, he's done it enough to know, but he's still not quite making the connection. He's missed the marker 3 or 4 times. All right, let's sit, do a confidence boost, because the confusion will knock their confidence down. And then they kind of fall apart on you. So you can build them back up, kind of manipulate them, I guess, really.
I mean...
And you'll notice a lot of times...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. You'll notice a lot of times when these pups are young, they're at that 6, 7, 8, 9 week mark, and they're doing really, really good. You'll be working on, obedience for 10 days, and they're just nailing it. And you walk out there, and it's like they shook their head and their brains fell out. Sit, what is that? Lay down, and they're just completely out of it. And there's something between the short-term memory and the long-term memory storage where things just fall off the radar a little bit. And you go back the next day, and wham, they've got it again. And it's like, I don't know what it is. I've heard a lot of people, a lot of pros explain, there is something with that when things are getting moved from short-term memory to long-term, that something just gets lost in translation and whatever. And you're going to have hard days. And that's where, yes, you want to end on a positive note, but sometimes the positive note is putting the dog up for the day and saying, that's fine. We'll work on this tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and that's, it's something that I've seen the very, very best dog trainers. I mean, in any discipline. I actually saw it the other day. It was, I just had Kevin Murphy here for a couple weeks. The world's greatest small game hunter, Kevin Murphy, out here hunting with me for a couple weeks. And on one of the last days he was here, we went to a sheepdog trial. that was happening in this area. And we got there late because we've been out hunting all day. And we got to see the last 2 runs. And they were just beautiful examples of exactly what you're talking about. Because the very first one, it was a nursery trial, so the dogs were young. The very first one got a difficult sheep that wasn't really respecting the dog, and the dog wanted the respect. And they kind of went back and forth for a little while, and then the guy could see that the dog was about to go in and grip or bite the sheep, which during herding, lambing is something that they're actually trained to do. But during a sheep trial, or during trials, it will get them disqualified. And this guy read this dog to my eye perfectly, because he saw that this dog was about to crack. And he saw it half a second too late, because he had stepped down from the podium and was about to call the dog off to call it a day, because he could see that this was not going to end well. And as he stepped off, the body language changed just a little bit, and he actually gave it the command to grip, because he could see that dog was going to go in for a bite a millisecond later. But hey, Dad told me to do it. He called him off. They ended their run. Dog was perfectly happy. Dog was like, hey, didn't care. That dog was ready to roll. They'd ended on a good note, even if they got disqualified on paper. That guy had managed to get that dog through that situation without breaking it. The very next person ended up with another difficult sheep. They handled it completely differently, to the point where all the sheep, there are 2 sort of really unforgivable sins for a sheepdog. One is to leave the field, like intentionally be like, I'm done, and go and hide under the truck. Another one is to just lay down and give up, like, completely. And that's what happened. The sheep just like immediately picked up on that this dog didn't have what it took, and that the owner and the dog were not communicating, and just started to graze, completely ignored the dog. And the owner, instead of calling it a day, stood there and screamed for his full amount of time, until the judges said, well, your time's out. And that was a lose for that dog. They ended on a terrible, terrible note. And it's exactly what you're talking about, I think, is that, sometimes the very best thing you can do is to happily screw up with your dog and call it a day.
And I think we tend to overcomplicate it a lot too. Like, I mean, sometimes you'll read these training methods, or someone saying, well, do this, this, and this, and it sounds like you need to read to your dog for 30 minutes a day and play Beethoven in the background. And it's not. I mean, I'm out here just luring these dogs into the body position with hot dogs. And that's how I start. I cut up hot dogs into little corn kernel sized chunks, depending on the size of the puppy, obviously. And I put them in my hand, and I'll have maybe 10 or 15 in my hand, and I'll just be able to feed them out through my thumb, and and I want to set the puppy up for success. Like, because I usually have the other dogs loose, what I'll do is I have my heat kennel, and I'll take the puppy in there. I'll put the puppy in there for 5 minutes before I go in there to work with him, because I know that puppy is going to want to explore that kennel. So why would I set myself up for failure getting frustrated because I can't get the puppy's attention because he's curious about all the smells in the kennel?
Right.
Like, you have to be smarter than the dog. Just set yourself and the puppy up for success, because there's plenty of failure later. And there are times you need to allow them to fail in order to get that correction to proof them. So I'll start out with the hot dog chunks, and I'll feed them 10 or 15 just to get them. We're like, ooh, those are great. Cleve calls them puppy crack, because they can't resist them. And once I have their attention, they realize, oh, she's got those. I'll take that I'll bring the puppy in front of me to where, you know, his chest is facing my shins, and I will take that scent and lure. I'll move my hand back over his head, because what he's naturally going to do is lean back, which is going to rock his weight back onto his haunches, and he's going to sit. I've seen where people will try to teach the dog, and I'm not picking on this method. I've seen where people will teach the dog by pushing the rump down. Well, the first thing they're going to do when you feel pressure is you brace against it. And instead of the dog going, wait, why are you pushing on me? What's going on? And their instinct is to want to jump back forward. This puppy is mimicking the motion of my hand. So he's sitting back. Oh man, when my butt touches the ground, I got a snack. And for me personally, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I don't introduce the command until they have the motion down. I've lured them into the motion and they're starting to realize, okay, when that hand goes back, wham, I'm sitting. Then I start the command. I say it one time. And the reason I do that is because sometimes it takes them a while. They're moving around, they're moving to the side. You really need to use your body and your hand to manipulate their body and kind of mirror their movements to where you can essentially force them into that position just by where you place your hand. So I don't want to be telling them to sit while they're doing or lay down or whatever position I'm luring them into. I don't want to be introducing that command when they're not following it. That's just going to deaden it. Wait for them to learn the movement and then match the command to it. And I think something I have noticed spending most of my life around dog sports that are dominated by men, one thing I think a lot of men tend to struggle with is reward. With rewarding appropriately for keeping attention and really exciting a puppy. When they're little bitty guys, you know, they're up to 4 months and everything, they're so excited and everything's great. I was joking around with Cleve the other day. I said, you know, if you're not questioning your own sexuality, you're not rewarding happy enough. If you're not feeling a little bit like a fool because you're like, oh yeah, good puppy, you know, and loving on them and really getting them amped up, you're not giving that puppy enough of a mental hit to be like, yeah, I want to recreate that because that felt great. Now you phase that out. Obviously, I'm not doing that with my 4 or 5 year old dogs, but like everything, you raise and lower the threshold for things throughout their life.
I'm picking up a little bit on your shirt.
And that's where it comes
on your microphone. That's
sorry.
Okay. There we go. That's perfect.
How's that?
Sorry to interrupt.
So, no, you're good. And that's where I will often let unwanted behaviors, depending on the puppy, this comes back to reading the puppy. If I have a dog who is tentatively trying to reach up and put his paws on me as I'm bending down to lure the dog into the sit situation, I'll just move my leg. And it may take 4 or 5 times to where that pup just kind of falls his own weight on his front and goes, okay, well, that's not going to work. And that behavior self-extinguishes. Whereas if I have a puppy who's basically body slamming me and trying to climb on me, he's probably going to get nudged over backwards a little bit with a knee. And then they're like, oh, okay, that's not the appropriate thing. You let them discover what the appropriate response is and then build upon that. And that's what gets a puppy that is problem solving and is expanding mentally, in my opinion. Now, can you over reward if you have a dog that's naturally maybe a little scatterbrained, doesn't quite have the attention span? You can amp them up so much that they won't go right back into that learning mode where it's reward. Okay, what's next? Reward. Okay, what's next? It's kind of reward. Oh my God, lose your mind. Try and get them brought back in and dialed in again. So you really need to base it on the reaction you're getting from the puppy, not what you think should be happening. Right.
I mean, it makes so much sense. And then, I mean, it really does. The sitting, you know, I try to apply so much of these things, you know, or at least that mentality to how I train my pups. But I see that I've got a lot of places where I could do it more, you know, like the sitting thing. You know, I'll have to admit, you know, I'm a big guy. I'm not going to like squash a puppy down on the floor, but you know, I'll put some pressure. I'll put my hand on its back end and just leave it there, knowing that a puppy eventually I'm not going to push it down, but eventually it's going to get tired of holding my hand up and sit down. And then I'll give it then I've been giving them the, the reward, praise, whatever it is at that time. But I like your way of going about that a lot better. I think that's, so much of what we do is smoke and mirrors, isn't it?
It is, and it just seems so much easier, and they pick it up quicker. Like laying down, especially a transition when you first teach from laying down or sitting to laying down, can be tough on a puppy to figure out, and they're naturally so exuberant. The last thing they want to do is lay down and lay still. So I will use that same method, whereas, before I was taking the hot dog in my hand, the little hot dog chunk, and going backwards over their heads so they leaned backwards. I will have them sit, and then I'll place my hand almost on the ground, and I'll have my palm facing down because the scent is going to come out of the bottom of my hand, not the top. And what they will naturally do, and this takes, you'll have maybe 10, 15 times for them to figure out, oh, I need to lay down. They'll be sitting, and they'll contort themselves into all kinds of positions to try and get to that treat in your hand. So that's where I'll use my body to either block or allow their movements. If they are leaning too far forward and I can tell a second before that their butt is about to pop up and they're about to go into a standing position, I'll push my hand towards them because it pushes their body weight back, and then they don't want to be contorted, so they'll naturally bring their front end down. Right. Whereas if they're too bound up, leaning towards their hind end, I'll pull my hand forward. And it may just be an inch or a half an inch difference. And they'll pull forward, and they'll place their stomach on the ground and lay down, and bam, instant reward. As soon as they do what I'm asking them to do, that's when they get the instant reward. You can't be, 3 or 4 seconds behind, especially when they're little like that, because you'll lose them. They won't make the connection.
Sure.
But I mean, within 10 minutes, you'll have that puppy doing it, doing your desired response. Now, that being said, you still need to match the command to it. You still need to get it solidified so that without a shadow of a doubt that dog knows what you're asking them to do. And based on the command, not based on me bending down with the treat, because they'll read your body and say, okay, well, when I go, she bends over, I go to sit, and then that they think that's what's making them do it, not you telling them the command. And then you can start, once some people will do it on a lead, they'll proof on a lead and then go to an e-collar. Some people skip straight to an e-collar. I tend to do both. I do make my puppies pack around a collar from, basically the time they're big enough to, just to get them used to it. A dog being collar-wise, I don't think there's a dog out there that isn't going to be, but it's a matter of consistency breeds habit. And you don't, when they're little and they're learning, you don't give them a command you can't back up and you can't make them do. So if I have puppies that don't have the come command down and they're still distracted, I'm not going to sit there and yell at them to come 10 times. I'm going to go get that puppy and put it in the kennel or whatever I need. Now, once I know they know the command and I tell them to come and they look at me and go off and do their own thing, then they're going to get a correction. And that's what I talk about when I talk about the proofing. But you need to do these things in increments. You don't just start out with a huge amount of distractions. Everything is just building in increments, and it's so much easier than a lot of ways I think I've seen done in the past. And everybody's a lot happier with the results. It seems like the dogs are happy to go to work. They know, oh, I have to sit in order to get my collar on and turned loose. So wham, their butt's on the ground. And if they don't, I'll go collar somebody else. Now, there are some dogs that I'm not saying don't put pressure on a dog. There are some dogs, if they know it and they don't sit, they're going to get a physical correction. I'm not going over the top. Some people will use a lead and a healing stick just to proof things. Some people use a collar. It really just depends. But you just want to make sure that puppy for sure knows what you're asking before you start the proofing process.
Right. And
like for me, how I'll start the come command is I use a tone. I use the tone setting on the collar for my dogs to come find me or come back to me. So I'll put a puppy on a 25-foot rope and I'll have a collar on it. And I will, how I start it is I'll get that puppy's attention, because you want to make sure you have the puppy's attention first and foremost, no matter what you're teaching them. If they're half paying attention to you, you're wasting your time. Get the puppy's attention. I don't care if you kiss to them, stomp your feet, something, just get them to look at you. And then tell that puppy, come. And most of the time, you're going to start reeling them in because they're going to kind of look at you. You start reeling them in. They get to you. Oh, what a good dog, And then I'll walk off and kind of ignore them and let them get distracted. And then I'll get their attention again. And I'll repeat that process until they realize, oh, I run to her when she tells me to come. Perfect. Once they have that down, then I match that. I'll say, come, beep with the tone. They get rewarded for that. And they just start to associate things. It's really quite simple when you let it be, if you don't get too caught up in methodology and the psychology behind it. In all reality, it's just a conditioned response.
Sure. That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's, you know what? When I talk to people about training, how I train, you're able to explain in a lot of detail, not just how you do things, but why, which I really appreciate, because I'm not able to do that. I can explain a sort of overall vibe behind what I'm trying to accomplish, but so much of it gets, for me, and I mean, I'm not saying that I'm a good trainer, but so much of what I do with dogs is second nature at this point. Good and bad. And I appreciate that you're able to actually break it down, that you're cognizant of not just the how, but the why. Because that's something that I lack
appreciate
myself. I wish I had the ability to do that a little bit more.
I appreciate that, because I feel like I'm butchering explaining this.
It's I understand what you're saying. It's the closest I've been able to come to explaining why I do things the way I do things with my hounds when I'm training them, especially as pups, is disguising learning as play. So much of the time, I've spent, I'll take the Beagle, for example. So much of the time I've spent with him has been out in the forest with an e-collar on. And, there's some people were just appalled at that, because I started doing that with him when he was 3 or 4 months old. With the e-collar. Before that, he was so small I could catch him even if he didn't want to be caught. But, and
he definitely did not want to be caught.
But, it's not like I was out there trying to get him to trail anything, or really trying to mentally challenge him any more than being out in this great, humongous world is mentally challenging for a puppy in the first place. And he did a lot of things very, very early, which you could say is impressive, but none of these things still, we've had some major success in the last couple of weeks, Mike and I, but none of what he's done that has caused that success is anything that he does with any kind of consistency. You know what I mean? It's getting more consistent. It's getting to the point where he where he knows what I'm asking him. And as he learns what I'm asking him, I start to maybe ask it a little bit more often. It's not just an association. It's, I'm getting to the point now where I can actually ask him to do something like, hey, check out this trail. See if there's anything at the end of it. Doesn't always work, but for every time we're out, we are strengthening the associations that I want him to make. And hopefully, theoretically anyway, weakening the associations that I don't want him to make. Not running fox and, not running birds and things like that.
That's a perfect segue into one of the techniques that I use when the puppies are, they kind of are understanding a little more of what I'm trying to get them to do with my hand and how I'm positioning it, like sit. But maybe they're not quite sure. So I'll use something that's called a jackpot, where when they sit and they get it, instead of giving them one hot dog chunk, I might give them 4 or 5, or they may get some hot dog chunks and a piece of cheese, and it keeps it interesting. And they're like, oh man, okay, that was such a huge reward. That's definitely, I definitely want to recreate that. And then they start thinking, okay, that's what gets it. And I think it definitely helps to reproduce those results. And obviously you can't do that, when you're out in the hills and whatnot, but that same mentality of just making sure that reward is there and appropriate for the amount of try that they're giving you really helps to recreate that correct decision on their part.
Absolutely. How much do you think...
And you have to set them up...
Sorry, I was just going to ask, how much do you think ignoring undesired behavior should play a part in training pups? I'm not necessarily talking about things that, there's grades of undesirable behavior. You've got you and I have talked about before, fighting, things like that. Something that I'm going to put the kibosh on really fast and pretty hard, because the consequences of those behaviors are so severe that it's actually something that I'm going to come down hard on to avoid ending up in that situation again. I'd rather come down hard once and, once or twice and not have to do it again. But a lot of times I find that I end up just ignoring undesirable behaviors, or not ignoring totally, as in letting them just continue on and do whatever they're doing, but rather than tell them no or give them some negative feedback, just sort of deflect into something else I want them to be doing. Sort of refocus on something else rather than actually pull focus to that thing as a negative thing. Just refocus onto the desired thing that I hope that I'm trying to get them to do.
100%. And when I'm talking pups in this podcast, I'm using, 4 months and down. So a lot of times with their little piranha teeth, when I'm feeding these treats, my hand will get sore because they will latch on to your thumb if you're not fast enough to stick the hot dog in their mouth. Hot dog
flavored fingers.
And I'm not... Exactly. So I'm not going to correct that puppy for biting. It wasn't an intentional mouthiness, but I'm not going to give him that reward until he starts licking my hand instead of trying to ingest it. And then they get the reward. So there are some things you can definitely extinguish by ignoring. Depending on the dog, like I said earlier, if the dog is just putting his paws on me, kind of trying to jump, I'm just going to move my leg and he'll naturally kind of fall onto his front feet and be like, oh, okay, well, that didn't work. It depends how hard the dog is. I've had some dogs that you can ignore. They might bark here and there and you ignore it. They don't get any attention for it, so they stop. I have had some that are very not that way, and so I did not respond by ignoring. I think it depends on the dog. It depends on the surroundings, because each dog is also so fluid. Their working level of pressure and reward is going to be different at home than it's going to be in the hills, out in public, in other scenarios where there's other dogs.
Yeah.
You just kind of need to mesh yourself to the individual dog and individual situation at the time. But I have found myself probably ignoring more than I used to. There are times, like, for example, redirection can be a tricky thing because if it's a behavior you definitely do not want repeated, you want to correct it so it doesn't happen again. But you can also, like you said, redirect your way out of it because they are so short attention span. You can just, if they're up in the flower beds, I might toss a rock at the tin on the shed. Ooh, spooks them. They jump off, they get out of the flower bed, and they go do something else. I don't constantly want to be coming down on a dog. Are there times for it, and there's been a thought process, I feel like, in hounds also, where the wilder they are, the better they're going to be. And then once they're at that starting age, just drop the hammer on anything you don't like.
Yeah.
And that's tough. And it's not specific to hounds. I mean, I think as people have more access to more information via the internet, seminars, things like that, we see a lot of stuff that we didn't see 20 years ago, a lot of different methodologies. So there are some things I will definitely redirect. I've heard people say, oh, if puppies are getting mouthy and biting you, squeal and turn away. I am not going to squeal. A high-pitched noise is going to excite them. You're basically rewarding them. What I am going to do is grab their tongue and be really annoying and stick my finger towards the back of their throat and make it to where they're like, oh my God, I don't want her hand in my mouth at all. Just kind of reverse psychology stuff.
Totally. I mean, so much of dog training is reverse psychology. In my, honestly, that's been my experience, especially with, the bulk of my experience coming from the sled dogs is, if the dogs decide to stop on a hill, running up a hill, the sled dogs, I don't want them to do that unless I ask them to. So part of my job is going to be looking at them and deciding when it's appropriate to stop and give them a breather so that they don't do it themselves. If I mess up and misjudge the situation and they do stop on their own, we're going to be sitting there for a long time because I'm not going to let them go until they are losing their minds wanting to go. Because I don't want them to learn that that's okay to do that. I would much, much rather that they learn that if we stop on our own, we're going to be standing here like idiots for an hour. It doesn't take many times before they learn to just, dig in, pull up that hill. It's the reverse psychology aspect of it. Yeah.
You need to be able to see the future.
I think,
and that's where it helps with.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's.
You're good.
What are you doing, Mike? Stop it! Sorry, Beagle's chewing on socks.
Oh, I don't know. You told him twice. I do the same thing. Honestly, I catch myself doing it, and I'm like, "Dang it! You got to quit doing that." I am by no means perfect, and I think that's where it comes into too, as far as like being able to see the future and paying attention to what could happen. You need to set your dogs up for success. And by that, I'm not saying don't let them fail. Don't let them get a correction or make the wrong choice. What I'm saying is if I'm going to use food rewards to train a puppy, I'm going to train before I feed. If I'm going to train in a new environment, I'm going to let that dog check out the new environment until this dog has a solid basis. And then I'm obviously going to raise the bar, but I'm talking, 8 weeks to 4 months, still just baby babies. A common mistake you see in dogs that are hunted with, more so bird dogs, and this goes back to the association. Oh, I took my puppy out to the range to see if he's gun shy. He is. That's not how any of this works. And that's a very hard thing to overcome. Can it be done? Absolutely. It's just a lot more work than doing it correctly the first time. And it goes back to making those associations good. If I want my puppy to love a gun, I'm going to have somebody standing, 200 yards away with a blank pistol, and I'm going to be throwing a toy or loving up on that puppy or something that puppy really enjoys. And he's not going to be paying attention to that. He's just going to notice it in the background and slowly get closer and work up
Right.
and work up and just building threshold. But if that puppy is just, I'm not going to take that puppy out from being cooped up and napping and attempt to get his
Right.
attention. Not because you can't, but why make it harder than it needs to be? Wait until that puppy. Yeah. Right. I mean, and if I'm trying to get their attention to teach them something, I'm probably going to let them run around for 20 minutes first. You're not going to give a kid a crap ton of sugar and then tell him to go sit in American history class and then yell at him for fidgeting. Like, it's just not going to work. Work with the dog, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Like for me, when I'm working on getting them to sit still for their nails, and I have some older dogs that need to counter condition because they've got to where they don't like their nails being done. I started using a Dremel again also, and some dogs are not about that. I'm not going to do it the first part of the day, not because I can't, but again, why would I want to make it any harder than it has to be? I'm going to let them run around, and then when they have their energy out and they're kind of tired and just want to hang out, that's when I'm going to do it. A lot of it is dogs are really so much easier than they're made out to be. You just have to think in terms of the dog.
Right.
I mean, they really have very few needs. And if you can capitalize on those, man, it's going to make your life so much easier, especially with puppies. The old method of crate training a puppy where you put the puppy in the crate and fuss at him when he cries and endure howling for hours on end throughout the night until the puppy gives up. Why not put that puppy in a crate with a Kong with frozen peanut butter or something and let him associate the crate with a good thing and want to go in there? It's just so much easier. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, I am not a treat pusher, clicker, anti-correction by any means. I'm just going to use that dog's natural motivation to make my life easier. And then once we get to that point where the dog maybe starts getting a little more independent and goes, I don't really want to do that. That's going to say, well, sorry, but you're going to.
I mean, it's...
And then reward after that.
What we're talking about here is not, an instead of or either or. It's, it's an improvement or it's another tool in your toolbox.
It's a mutually beneficial.
Where you've got this ability then to go to, you don't have to go to the same well every time you're presented with the same problem. You've got other options. You've got other ways you can approach it. And I think that that's something that's really valuable is not having standard responses to everything. I talk to some people sometimes who say, well, every time a dog does this, I'll do blah. And it's like, well, why? Like, that might work some of the time, but I can't imagine that works every single time. And it's like you said, it's almost this aspect of you need to be able to see the future. At least, we're gamblers, all of us training dogs. We're gambling that we're going to make the right call. We're gambling, and it is ultimately a gamble. We can't read their minds, but we're hedging our bets that they're going to do this thing next and acting appropriately. And the really good dog trainers can make it look like they're psychic. They really can. They really can. But it's something that I would love to see more people focus a little bit more on, is that early puppyhood development, not just getting them out, showing them caged coons or whatever, which is, is not necessarily, is not a bad thing to do. That's not what I'm saying, but it's doing more with them, letting them experience more, because the more they experience, the more flexible they're going to be, the more life experience they're going to have, the more confident they're going to be, I believe, in their own ability to problem solve. You know, just in the sense of, you know, like your dogs, they're used to mules. I very seriously doubt that your dogs are going to have problems with moose. You know, whereas my dogs, I have problems with moose because, you know, I've not been good enough about conditioning them to not think that those are big fun things that they can run. A moose is going to run for a while until it gets angry and doesn't. You know, so it's, you know, something that something I did, you know, last week while Kevin was here is I took Mike to a horse farm. And that was one of the major motivations for doing that, was because I wanted him to learn that these things were not actually all that much fun. And, you know, moose, horse, different deal, obviously. But at the same time, I think they're similar enough so that a lot of the knowledge he gained from that trip is going to translate in his little doggy head to the moose.
That's one scenario I've been waiting on to happen, because we are getting quite the moose population around us.
Are they Shiraz moose where you guys are?
That may be interesting.
Yeah.
They are, yeah. They've migrated in naturally. You know, a lot of people say, oh, the wolves in Idaho are pushing them down. There aren't enough wolves in southern Idaho to put that much pressure on them. And if there is, and why aren't the wolves here with them? I mean, don't get me wrong. We get ones that pass through and they go back. Or they don't. But they're just naturally coming down. We actually, there's a mountain range on the Nevada-Idaho state line that's just north of my house here. That's excellent moose habitat. And we find their tracks a bunch, find their beds. I'm still waiting to find a lion-killed one. That would make my year. But, yeah, it's just, and then you add in the excitement of other dogs. Because what one dog might not normally do alone or with a buddy, it's kind of like the bad kid in school that your folks didn't want you hanging out with because you, normally a polite, respectful citizen, kind of turned into a little bit of a jerk when you hung out with them. That happens with dogs for sure. And they go through phases too. I mean, we have two males that I know about every 6 months, they're going to get a little blow-offy on commands. The other day, we were fixing some fence for a gal and way up in the hills, and I called one of the males, and he blew me off. Now, disclaimer, with a hound, I will give them a longer response time than I would with, say, a shepherd or a Mal or a lab, just because they are so into their nose. I think it takes them longer to mentally process, oh, she's talking to me. So I'll give them a split second longer.
Makes sense.
This dog flat blew me off. Like, I knew he heard me. He flat blew me off. So I'm like, huh. All right. He was in a spot. He wasn't going to get in any trouble. I just wanted to check something on him. So I called him. I said, oh, okay. We're in that phase again. Great. Because obedience is not a one-time thing. It's a constant, it's a marathon. It's just constant reinforcement throughout the life. So when I got back to the side-by-side, I grabbed the remote. The next time I called him, I saw him flick an ear back and continue on. So I called him again and toned him, or called him again and gave him a light stim. Haven't had to do it again since. They're just, I don't want to say they're constantly pushing the boundaries, but no matter how much we try to be perfect, you know what? There are times where I've called them a couple of times, or I've called them and then they've come to me and I've got busy doing something, so I ignored them and they're like, oh, okay, well, whatever. No one's perfect. I'm surely not. It's a constant battle. Not even a battle, really. It's just a constant reminding of yourself that you need to be cognizant of what you're doing. And for people who live differently than I do, you know, for someone who lives in a cul-de-sac, yeah, I'm going to want an immediate, drop what you're doing. I don't care what, come back to me. Because if your dog gets out and is in a road or whatever the case may be, some other stray dog is loose and comes running up aggressively. I want that dog to mind perfectly. I'm going to put sit, stay, come, leave it, place, whatever on that dog. It's just not something I have to do for my dogs personally right now. I have considered starting to do a behind command. Behind is just what I would call it. Of where now that there's just, it seems like since COVID, outdoor recreation has exploded so much in the Western US that even places where you weren't running into people before, now you've got day hikers with their border collie or their blue heeler or whatever. And strange dogs, there's always going to be tension, especially when you add one strange dog who's naturally going to be defensive when he comes on to 3, 4, 5, 6 other strange dogs. And usually that dog is going to be defensive. There's going to be posturing. There's going to be this. Owners are going to be yelling, he's friendly, don't worry. That dog's probably going to be acting offensively to the other, my personal dogs, whatever. It's just a situation that can cause problems in a hurry. So I would like to be able to just go behind, or leave it and have my dogs come up behind me, let the other dog and person go on, whatever. And it's just something where when you have a lot of dogs, you need to be on things more because they feed off of each other and they'll feed off of each other's energy. So if one dog blows you off, it's going to encourage the other dogs too. So this is not stuff, even though it's stuff that happens in a 4-month time frame, this is stuff that's going to set them up for the rest of their life and to make it so much easier for you to build on that. And then I feel like too, the better mannered your dogs are, let's say something happens, God forbid, you get killed in a car wreck, whatever, and your dog needs to find somewhere to go. If that dog is mannered, that dog is going to be appreciated wherever he goes, and he's not going to end up being dumped at the local pound or passed around because he has bad habits. Like, we all want to focus on the hunting stuff, but you still have to live with the dog the rest of the time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's really a great, sort of a great place to end, I think, is, we all want good hunting dogs, but you got to live with them the rest of the year. And that's, I've had some hunting dogs that were just, ultimately was the issue with Dan, was that loved him as a hunting dog. I mean, to this day is the best dog I've ever hunted over. But, it just wasn't working, and, then I've got the flip side, Buzz, who's the best house dog of all time, but is completely useless as a hunting dog at this point. And it's going to be what you're talking about is setting up from a very, very young age. And I think that is, really important to do it from a very, very young age, like you're talking about from like day 2. You're setting the groundwork for,
and it doesn't take that long.
It doesn't. It takes such a,
I mean, 5, you'd be amazed when they're so little, 10 minutes a day, quality over quantity. I mean, you can have them handling in literally 10 minutes a day. We've all, and it's hard to find the time, but you know what? I've got to my point where I've kind of stopped saying, oh, I don't have the time, and saying I haven't made it a priority. I can take 10 minutes out of my sleep or social media or whatever the case may be. And, if I'm in a hurry and I've got to do this, I'm going to take that pup with me and work him along the way. And we can't get caught up in our own sport either. If you're really looking to understand the way dogs mentally tick, sign up for an online course or an online seminar from a retriever trainer or just an obedience trainer or whatever. And you can pick up so many different little tricks for your tool bag that you can just modify to fit your scenario, I guess.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think that if you legitimately do not have 10 minutes a day to put into your puppies, then you're too busy to have puppies, in my opinion. Because for you to have a good
because the 10 minutes
for you to be able to keep track of that litter, their health, how they're doing, how they're eating, you're going to need at least 10 minutes a day.
And that 10 minutes now is going to save you hours.
Days.
And a lot of frustration later.
Days and days and days and days. Yeah. No, I totally...
And I mean, if anyone... What I need to do is kind of video, because it's so hard to explain over a podcast how I'm moving my body and moving my hand and luring them into these positions. But, there's a lot of good YouTubes on luring if people are trying to figure things out. I'm always more than willing to send folks videos too. It just makes life a lot easier for everyone involved and keeps it fun.
I can see that. I can see some room for improvement on how I'm going about it. Certainly. And I think that I hope that some people get past the sort of pictures of Caesar Milan that are going through their heads as we're talking about going a little bit, spending a little bit time on the obedience aspect. And maybe we shouldn't be using the term obedience. In the hound world, I guess they call it putting a handle on a dog, and that's not just getting the dog to come when you call. It's getting the dog to be. It's teaching the dog how to learn is what we're talking about here. And a dog that is more capable of absorbing information, absorbing events, situations, consequences, and variables, and translating that into knowledge. Any dog that's good at that is ultimately, I believe, going to be a better hunting dog. If your dogs have the genetic potential to do what you want them to be doing, what we're talking about is only going to help. There's no downside to doing this. At all.
And it's not about, and it's not about turning them into a robot. Right. It's expanding their mental horizons and teaching them that they can, like my little hound dog pool we have here. I've had problems with puppies falling in. Actually, my latest beagle, when he was little, fell in, and I do have a ladder so they can get out. But I had taken him and taught them, don't just panic and scratch the sides, and I'll help them get out to where they're like, oh, okay. They learn to think things through and look for a solution versus just giving into instinct and panicking.
Right. Absolutely.
And that translates, it doesn't just stay in your yard. That translates to other things as well and just makes them all around easier to be around, I feel like, and just kind of rounds them out a little bit, maybe.
Absolutely. Totally agree. We're going to, I feel like we've scratched the surface of this, but we may need to talk about this a few more times.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, there's so much depth people can reach and go into. It's definitely something that has to be broken up into small doses. I agree. But it's been fun nerding out with you, Becky. I appreciate you coming on. It's 1:00 in the morning here, so I might call it a day. But yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for coming on and talking.
Thanks for having me on, and I'm gonna run out and get these dogs fed. And
excellent. Well, good. I will get you back on here in not too long.
Man, I love that sound.